Hello, fabulous second graders. This is Miss Lund. This time I'm coming to you from my home, and you can see my cat Maud has decided to join us for Read Aloud. She's not really interested in books, but she is interested in whatever I'm doing. So she may jump down or cause trouble, or she may be a good listener. We'll just have to see. So, in 1001 Arabian Nights by Geraldine McCaughrean, we are on the two lives of Sultan Mahmud. King Shayar remained so melancholy during the next days that his courtiers realized how many clouds Scheherazade had previously lifted from over the royal palace of Sasan. He sat in his throne with his head on one hand and seemed neither to hear nor see the babble of voices, the herd of faces that streamed past him in the audience chamber. No suits were satisfied, no judgments were given. The whole routine of the court fell into disorder. Finally, the king's wazir became so concerned for the king's health that he went to his daughter Scheherazade and said, "Dearest daughter, wife of my king, can you tell us any reason for the king's latest gloom? For indeed it seems that all the music has left his soul, and sudden autumn has stripped the tree of his heart of all its leaves." "Oh, I am lower in his esteem than any prisoner who sits in prison waiting for the day of his execution. I simply wait outside prison," said Scheherazade. "But if I can, I shall devise a story tonight that will change his mood for the better." A funny story to make him laugh?" asked her father. "I think not," replied Scheherazade. "For if a man is melancholy, laughter is as far from his heart as land is from a drowning man." "Well, a sad story, then, to use up all his tears," suggested the wazir. "Certainly not," Scheherazade answered. "For what danger will I be in if the king becomes one shade darker, one frown more melancholy? I will tell him the story of a melancholy king who learned to appreciate his boundless good fortune." That night, Scheherazade began. When King Ratafia of the Rif was born, Allah heaped on him every good fortune a man could wish for. His wit and good sense were housed in the most handsome of heads. His health and energy were housed in a tall and agile body. His wife's gifts as a cook, a hostess, a musician, and a writer of poetry were only surpassed by her beauty. And her beauty, in turn, was only surpassed by that of his three little babies, 2 sons and a daughter. During his reign, the walls of his chancery were demolished and rebuilt to make room for the vast quantity of gold and silver coin that represented his wealth. That means he had so much money, his treasure room wasn't large enough, and he had to build a new one. The stables were rebuilt because all the royal mares foaled, and the royal herd tripled in size. All the members of his staff were, without exception, honest, loyal, and dedicated, for they knew that King Ratafia was loved by every subject in his widespread kingdom of the Rif. In short, King Ratafia had everything, and there can hardly be a man who has heard of his good fortune and not envied him his happiness. Oh, did I say happiness? No, one thing was lacking. King Ratafia did not have the ability to enjoy all that he owned. What virtue is he missing? I hope you said fortitude. For long days at a time, the king would be plunged into the blackest of depressions. He would sit in his throne, his head in one hand, sighing sighs until the windows of his palace were all clouded. He would kick his wazir in the shins and shout at his wife if she kept him waiting for as much as the third part of a second. If he played with his children and made them laugh, he would complain that they were too noisy. And if he refused to play with them and made them cry, he would again complain of their noise. During one of the king's blackest moods, a strange visitor came to the palace. He inspired such respect that at the sight of him, all the courtiers and officials fell back. No one barred his path to the king. If anyone had guessed his age, it would have been measured in hundreds of years. He had a beard which had never seen scissors, and he wore it wrapped around his body in place of clothes. Wrapped like this in his beard, he approached the king's throne, but did not make the customary bow. Instead, he grabbed the king by the wrist and pulled him towards the window. Now, the throne room was in a high tower and had 4 windows overlooking the whole city. From the first window, there was a view of the palace moat. From the second, a view of the city. From the third, a view of the Nile. And from the fourth, a prospect of gardens and parkland. But when the strange old man threw open the first window, the king ducked down below the sill, for he saw an army of men in the very act of storming his palace. Catapults were showering boulders against the walls. Men in chainmail were throwing across the moat grappling hooks, which clutched and clawed at the masonry. Battering rams were splintering the doors of the keep, and a sleet of arrows was driving against the face of the building. "Alert the army! We are under attack!" cried the king. But no one seemed to believe him, for all the courtiers and officers standing nearby, none of them moved. The gnarled old man slammed the window shut and dragged the king by the wrist to the second. But as he opened it, the reeking stench of smoke scorched the king's nostrils, and the glow of fire lit up his whole city. Buildings were crumbling into dust, like the ashes of a smoldering log fire. The king's own bronze statue was melting into a shapeless mass, from which a river of molten bronze flowed into the gutters. Shreds of burning cloth blew this way and that in the air, raining down soot on the heads of 1,000 citizens as they fled their burning houses, screaming for help. "Carry the horse troughs into the city. Tear the blankets off every bed. My people's homes are burning down. Will no one help them?" But no one among the king's courtiers or officers went to their assistance. Slamming the second window shut, the rattled old man opened the third, just in time to reveal the River Nile bursting its high banks and washing away 2 cotton farms and a rice paddy. Fishing boats were swept prow first into the walls of riverside houses. Alligators were wreathing through the streets, devouring those who stumbled about trying to escape the flood. "Throw lifelines from the windows. Take the palace doors off their hinges and make rafts of them for the drowning to cling to. The Nile has burst its banks and my people are being washed away. Will no one act to help my poor citizens?" But no one moved except for the grizzly-bearded old man, who slammed shut the third window and opened the fourth. The last fruit in the palace orangery was shriveling to the size of raisins and dropping from the trees. The trees themselves were nodding and shriveling as the garden was invaded by the blast of the sun, and the scouring sand of the Sahara swept in to swamp the flower beds and bury the lawns. As the sand dunes formed in drifts along the palace walls, nests of scorpions broke from every piece of remaining grass, and knots of black vipers suddenly festooned the bleached bushes. Locusts, those are like grasshoppers, carpeted the ground as far as the eye could see, crackling their bodies and devouring one another when there was nothing green left to eat. And yellow hyenas shrieked with laughter below the window to see the destruction of Sultan Mahmud's parks and all the surrounding farms. "Locusts and desert are swallowing us up," cried the Sultan. "Take your hands off me, old man, and help me make these heartless people act to save some lives." The old man, though he seemed frail, had the strength of 10 in his grip. He had no trouble in dragging the king to the drinking fountain in the center of the room, where he placed a second hand in the nape of the king's neck and plunged his head beneath the water. Down and down and down the king went, until 7 colors were flashing in his eyelids and the spent air was fluttering in his lungs. The fearsome grip slackened on his neck and arm, and he was released to struggle back to the surface. Up and up he swam, arms and legs driving through the water, and he lost consciousness just as his mouth tasted air again for the first time. Washed ashore by the surf, he lay with a strange beach under his back for an hour until the sound of voices stirred him to consciousness. "Well, here's a strange fish," said the peasants who found him. "What foolish and impractical clothes for a working man!" Many unfriendly hands stripped Mahmud of his satin robes and golden crown and dressed him in a shirt of coarse yellow sailcloth and breeches, pants, of roughest Hessian. That means leather. "I wish the sea had washed up a new donkey," said one voice as the Sultan stumbled to his feet. "Oh, don't be ungrateful," said another voice. "Allah sent you a foreigner, and foreigners can be made to work as hard as donkeys." "Where am I?" asked Sultan Mahmud. "Will no one here treat me with the respect I deserve?" "Oh, yes, indeed. I will use you with the respect you deserve, for my donkey died yesterday, and you can work in his place at my mill." Before Mahmud could make anyone understand that he was a sultan and the ruler of a great kingdom, he found himself trudging around inside the treadwheel of a flour mill. His bare feet grew hard against the splintery wood, and it almost seemed like they had been turned into hooves. His unkempt hair hung down and became so matted with sweat and dirt that it seemed almost like ears hanging from his head. The owner of the mill congratulated himself. "Oh, my friends were right. Having a foreigner is almost the same as having a donkey." The miserable Mahmud received only a bucketful of beans to satisfy his hunger and a trough of some sun-warmed water to quench his thirst. "Will no one release me from this terrible wheel?" he moaned daily. "Will no one have pity on a sultan who has almost been changed into a donkey?" We'll find out tomorrow, second graders. See you then. Bye.